As someone with a degree in digital communications with a focus on film production, here's some movie propaganda that I'm not falling for, and neither should you. Welcome to Tea and Popcorn, where we spill the tea on all things movies. I'm your host, Megan, and welcome to this virtual tea party and movie club. Let me know what you're drinking in the comments. Today, I am drinking Yogi Spiked Blackberry Focus Tea. Not sponsored, but should be. And my mug is a love-hate mug. Can y'all guess a film reference? If you know, drop it in the comments. This video is a reference to the TikTok trend propaganda I'm not falling for, but the official definition of propaganda, according to Webster, is ideas, facts, or allegations spread deliberately to further one's cause or to damage an opposing cause. And I'm going to use propaganda pretty loosely. I feel like these ideas are pretty prevalent within the film community or the discussions of film as a whole, and in some cases, marketing material. But without further ado, let's dive in. The first movie propaganda that you shouldn't fall for is that there are no more original ideas, or Hollywood is running out of ideas. That is just complete nonsense, especially with this year. There has been so many great original films to come out. There has been so many great original films within the past decade alone. However, I think that people just need to put more effort into finding them. At the time of this recording, award season is just around the corner, and that's actually a great way to discover new films. That's how I discover a lot of new films that went under my radar throughout the year. I've noticed with some audiences, if they're not familiar with the IP already or heard any marketing around it, they decide not to watch it. And I think people are just really missing out. Yes, we're starting to see a lot of sequels, prequels, and remakes and franchises, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Hollywood is running out of ideas. But if you're looking for something original to watch that is not already a part of a big franchise, or just seems like it's presenting more original ideas, I also found that TikTok is a really great source to discover new films. Just go on Film Talk or Movie Talk and go from there. Or just word of mouth, simply asking people, hey, what have you seen recently? And then that's a way you could discover new films. Speaking of discovering new films, some more propaganda that I am not falling for: ignoring non-English films. So I live in the US, and I find that the US has this idea of not paying attention to non-English films. There's almost like people are too lazy to read subtitles, which is kind of ironic because they'll read captions on their phone or caption while they're watching Netflix, but whatever. But exploring films from other countries or films that are not in your native language is just so rewarding. This is kind of like one of my early New Year's resolutions is to watch more non-English films. One of my favorite films of all time is Parasite. It's a Korean film. If you haven't watched it, you need to go ahead and watch it. It is so brilliant. It is hilarious. It is heartbreaking. It's just so good. Number 3, animation is a genre, not a medium. Now, what I mean by that is people tend to lump all animation together, and that is just so annoying to me. And I think that discredits the art of animation. Animation just encompasses so many genres, and it really is just a medium to tell a story. So I really hate that animation is just seen as just this one thing. It's almost like saying live action is a genre. It's not a genre. We already know that. So I think that's just very silly to kind of put animation in a box. Speaking of that, the idea that animation is just for kids. This grinds my gears so much. There are like so many underrated adult animated films. I actually talk about this in one of my unpopular opinions videos. This ticks me off so bad, especially during awards season, especially during some of the discourse with Oscars and the voting, because a lot of the time the Academy voters, they will vote for the film that their kid likes the most, even though some of the films that are nominated are adult animated films, which honestly, in some years, they should have won other than the most popular kids film of the year. It actually came to light recently that some of the Academy voters hadn't watched the films that they were voting on. And I kind of feel like that was so unsurprising because of what people have said regarding the best animated feature category. But in my unpopular opinions video, I do have some recommendations of my favorite adult animated films. So check that out after you're done with this video. And let's move on to the next piece of propaganda that I am not falling for, and this is so prevalent, that streaming is better than physical media. If it's not AI that's destroying the film industry, it is streaming that is slowly destroying it as well. Streaming used to be convenient, but honestly, it's just become such a big mess right now, especially because smaller films used to be able to rely on home video to make back their revenue in case they flopped at the box office. That's how we actually got a lot of cult classics, especially in the 90s and early 2000s. But streaming hasn't helped in that regard. From a consumer's perspective, have you ever watched a TV show on Netflix or any other streaming platform, but almost without warning, the show or the movie that you want to watch just disappears? That's the problem with modern streaming. Now, I'm glad that they're having warnings about when a movie is going to be removed from the respective platform, but it still makes it very annoying. Even if you buy a movie on, say, for instance, Amazon or Apple TV, those platforms can remove that content at any time. So that is why I am very pro physical media, not just because I grew up in the VHS and DVD era, even though I think I'm a little bit biased. But you could have something that you actually own. And if you want to get rid of it, you could get rid of it. But you truly own that media. And I'm glad that we're starting to see a rise in physical media being cool again. Heck, I still have my DVD player and I am not ashamed by it, because some of the DVDs that I own are now lost media, and that's another thing too. Not all movies are on streaming platforms. We are also starting to see streaming platforms edit the original content. Usually they say it's for safety or whatever, but I want to see the original edit regardless of the intentions of the platform. And I don't know, not to sound like too much of a conspiracy theorist, but streaming platforms having the ability to edit the original content willy-nilly just doesn't sit right with me. So there's that. So physical media is definitely better than streaming, in my opinion. And this is not to be completely anti-streaming. I see its benefits, but physical media just hits different. Another thing related to streaming brings me to propaganda that I am not falling for is 2-week theater runs and then going straight to streaming platforms. I hate that so much. Tarantino did a rant about those, and I have to agree with Uncle Tarantino, because there has been so many movies that I've wanted to see in theaters, but I just simply hadn't had the time. And then if the movie just doesn't perform well, or there's a limited release for whatever business reason, they just rip it out. And I'm just like, it was just so much fun back in the day when a movie had a month-long runtime in theaters and that you got to discover the film through word of mouth. And I would say you get the longer theater runs with like more popular films, like Wicked was in theaters for like 2 months, but then some movies just get pulled right away. But it's just really frustrating as a viewer. I think probably a business decision, it will make sense, but I don't know. It's just annoying because some films are just really meant to be on the big screen. And I think also this kind of contributes to people just not wanting to go to the theater anymore. And I understand people are really choosy because going to the theater is expensive. I briefly talked about that in my last video about theater etiquette. But I think everyone should have a chance or a longer chance to see these films. I don't know, this might be an unpopular opinion, but I just get really annoyed with that. These are kind of two ideas that I'm going to combine because I feel like they're two sides of the same coin. but that only women love rom-coms and only men love action movies. And I think if we're talking about legitimate propaganda, this kind of falls into the category alongside streaming. I'm only saying that because this is relating to marketing and communications, especially when it comes to promoting a film. Now, you could clearly see that action movies and rom-coms, how they're promoted is extremely gendered. You could see that about how the trailer is edited, any partnerships that said movie is doing. I actually work in marketing, and there is something called audience avatars or personas. Different companies say different things, but they're all mean the same thing. In a nutshell, audience avatars are a semi-fictional representation of an ideal customer for a product, or in this case, movie. And as a marketer, you create a profile of this person. So you'll do a write-up with their age, gender, buying habits, etc. And I'm saying semi-fictional because these personas are often based on market research, but the marketer does have to interpret the data. For instance, if they do research and they notice that a majority of their audience is women, they have to come up with a campaign surrounding the interest of women. I'm just using this for example, but keep that in mind how this ties into the gendered marketing for rom-coms and action films. And I feel like this happens with a lot of movies. However, I kind of feel like this idea of this black and white thinking about only women like rom-coms and only men like action movies is pretty outdated. I went to Variety's marketing summit, and one of the speakers, and I forgot her name, but she was basically talking about how some marketers are delusional because of these audience avatars that we create. She mentioned about how some audience avatars are very narrowing based off of age and race and gender, and they kind of make an avatar based on a stereotype other than an actual person, and understanding the nuances for each of them. But long story short, and marketing jargon aside, yeah, men like rom-coms, and that's okay, and women like action films, and that's okay. Like, case in point, I'm wearing a Kill Bill shirt. Like, yeah, your girl loves action films. But hey, I guess this type of marketing does work. It's propaganda, whatever, because it still happens, and it'll probably still happen until the end of time. But that is a movie marketing propaganda that I am not falling for. That kids' films do not have to be high quality or have depth to them. I feel like a lot of kids that grew up in the 90s and early 2000s, we were eating well when it comes to great quality kids' films. Yes, there was some garbage here and there, but for the most part, our films were great, especially animated films. Like, heck, we had The Lion King, we had Beauty and the Beast, we had Shrek. We also had just really great live action, family-friendly films. Like, I'm thinking about The Princess Diaries and The Parent Trap. Like, we had so many great quality kids. Jumanji is another one. Like, are you kidding me? Like, the list goes on and on and on. Like, I kind of feel like in recent years, there hasn't been really great, captivating kids films or films that are geared towards families, with the exception of K-pop Demon Hunters. But I kind of feel like when it comes to people critiquing movies, especially when it comes to like film talk commentary and reviews, some critics, they would say like, hey, this is not a great film because of XYZ reasons. And then the comments are flooded with people saying, well, it's just a kid's film. Why do you care? Why are you watching it? Because it's a kid's film. But kids truly do deserve to have great cinema, like the cinema that we grew up watching. But this is kind of an offshoot of this. So propaganda that I'm not falling for relating to this is that live action remakes are going to introduce new audiences to the original IP. For instance, like the Disney live action remakes. If you want to introduce a new audience to an existing project, why don't you just re-release it in theaters? What a concept. But no, that's not happening because Disney wants to make money, and they want to make money and make these big blockbuster movies. They don't want to do a re-release. So yeah, that is propaganda that I am definitely not falling for, because that is just silly. And ultimately, it's up to the parents themselves to introduce the kids to films that they knew and loved when they were kids. I truly think, as far as this propaganda, that is BS. That, oh, we're introducing this to a new audience, because as one is to make more money. Stop lying to us. That is propaganda that I am definitely not falling for. The propaganda that I am not falling for is that every great movie needs a prequel or a sequel. Absolutely not. Look, the idea of a standalone film is almost non-existent in modern days. And this was actually slightly inspired by the movie Sinners, how people were asking for a prequel or a sequel of that amazing film. Now, Sinners absolutely does not need a sequel. It's a great film, but I think it makes a really great standalone film. If they were to do a prequel, I think that would have been kind of interesting with some of the backstories with some characters, but I feel like all of our questions about the film have been answered. And yeah, sequels and prequels are a good way to make money, whatever. That's why we're getting all these dang projects, which also goes back to number one. However, like, what happened to just enjoying a standalone film? It's okay to have a standalone film. It's okay to just enjoy one film and let that be it. And I kind of feel like this low-key puts unnecessary pressure to some writers that feel like they have to make everything a franchise. The whole, like, cinematic universe of it all, and having everything be a sequel and a remake, that is propaganda that I am not falling for. Just focus on making good standalone films and stop being greedy. That horror and sci-fi do not deserve award season buzz. That is propaganda that I am definitely not falling for. The thing that I don't like about this idea is because these films are just considered genre films. They're considered less quality or that have less merit compared to dramas. I think with a lot of these Academy circles, they often forget sci-fi in particular, but they only nominate them for special effects. But there are some great sci-fi films out there.
Dune Part 1 and Part 2 has been getting nominated left and right for Best Picture, but it only really wins the technical categories. So, I mean, that is something that is very telling.
Now, I'm personally not the biggest sci-fi girly, but I do know there are some great ones out there. So let me know some favorites in the comments, but I do have a lot to talk about as far as the horror genre. Especially within the last decade, there has been so many horror films that receive Oscar snubs. I will give an example from the top of my head. Hereditary, especially when it comes to performances, like Toni Collette, she's amazing in this. Another one will be like The Babadook. I'm happy that films like Get Out and The Substance were nominated for Best Picture, but that rarely happens. There has just been so many great horror films, even in 2025 alone. Like, this has been such a monumental year for the genre. So if at least one of the films doesn't get nominated in one of the big categories, I am getting upset. I don't even know if this is like propaganda per se, but it's more so of an idea that I see in a lot of internet discourse regarding horror films, that a horror film's quality is based off of how scary it is or based off of how gory it is. Now, I think that's completely nonsense, because I just think horror films are way more than just blood and guts and scares. The thing about the horror genre is that even though it may have those elements, it's ultimately about something like a societal taboo or talking about something that is pretty current in the respective time that it's made in. And I'd argue that horror films are just very fun to analyze for this reason alone. More so than dramas at times, just because of horror's ambiguous nature. Now, there are some horror films that are slashers or just there to just like be scary or to be gory, whatever. But I don't think we should lump all horror films into that. For me, that's my favorite genre to analyze. And speaking of, the last propaganda that I am definitely not falling for is that it's just a movie, bro. That movies are just made to entertain people. And that is some case true, but film is so much more than that. There is a lot of intention when it comes to filmmaking. Whether it's a superhero movie or if it's a historical drama or a documentary. Yes, the films themselves can be entertaining, but ultimately films could also inform, and they're also made to start a conversation or to think about a particular topic that deeply. Movies in general is just not just mindless entertainment. And films that do like to dive into deeper subjects, they are not always so pretentious. Case in point, when I was talking about horror films. And around here, we do like to dive into movies. So if you do like deep dives, consider subscribing. Give this video a like if you like the vibes. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on the latest video. I will see you at the next party. Bye-bye!